Marcus Blackwell grabbed the champagne glass from his lawyer's hand and raised it toward his trembling wife across the courtroom. "To freedom," he announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "And to finally getting rid of dead weight." Elena sat, frozen tears streaming down her face as the judge prepared to sign away her entire life. But Marcus made one fatal mistake. He didn't notice the heavy oak doors slowly opening behind him. He didn't see the old man with the silver wolf head cane stepping inside. He didn't know that in exactly 47 minutes, he would be the one begging on his knees. Comment your city below, so I know how far this story has traveled. The champagne glass caught the fluorescent light of courtroom 4B as Marcus Blackwell raised it high above his head. "To freedom," he declared, his voice bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. "And to finally dumping the dead weight." He wasn't supposed to have alcohol in court, but Marcus Blackwell didn't follow rules. Rules were for ordinary people, for the weak, for women like his soon-to-be ex-wife, who sat trembling at the plaintiff's table like a wounded animal. His lawyer Harrison Cole grabbed his arm. "Marcus, put that down. The judge hasn't even signed." "Relax, Harry." Marcus took a long, deliberate sip. "Look at her. She's finished. We crushed her." Elena Blackwell didn't look up. She couldn't. Her hands were shaking so badly that she had to press them flat against the cold wooden table to keep them still. The gray dress she wore, purchased from a clearance rack because Marcus had frozen all her credit cards 3 months ago, hung loose on her frame. She had lost 15 pounds since the divorce proceedings began. Not from dieting, from not being able to eat. "Mrs. Blackwell." The court-appointed attorney beside her, a young woman named Patricia Hayes, who looked like she hadn't slept in a week, touched her shoulder gently. "Are you okay? Do you need water?" Elena shook her head. Words had abandoned her somewhere around the moment Marcus's private investigator had shown the courtroom photographs of her supposedly entering a hotel room with another man. Photographs that were complete fabrications. Photographs that Marcus had paid $20,000 to create. But who would believe her? She was nobody. A librarian's daughter from the Midwest who had met a charming tech entrepreneur at a coffee shop 10 years ago and made the mistake of falling in love with his potential instead of seeing his true nature. "The evidence is clear, Your Honor." Harrison Cole stood up, smoothing his $3,000 suit. "My client has demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that Mrs. Blackwell violated the fidelity clause of the prenuptial agreement. The timestamps on the photographs, the hotel records, the digital forensics, everything points to a pattern of infidelity." Judge Morrison, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for running a tight courtroom, shuffled through the papers in front of him. He looked at Elena with something that might have been pity, might have been annoyance. "Mrs. Blackwell, your counsel has presented no substantial evidence to counter these allegations. Do you have anything to say before I rule?" Elena opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Marcus laughed. It was a low, cruel sound that made several people in the gallery shift uncomfortably. "She's got nothing, Your Honor. She never had anything. I picked her up from nothing. I gave her everything. And this is how she repays me." "Mr. Blackwell." Judge Morrison's voice sharpened. "You will address the court through your attorney." "Of course, Your Honor." Marcus held up his hands in mock surrender, but the smirk never left his face. "My apologies." Patricia Hayes stood up shakily. "Your Honor, we request a continuance to review." "Denied." Judge Morrison cut her off. "You've had 6 months, Ms. Hayes. I'm ruling today." Elena felt the last thread of hope snap inside her chest. 6 months of fighting. 6 months of watching Marcus's expensive lawyers twist every truth into a lie. 6 months of being painted as an unstable, unfaithful gold digger when the reality was that she had spent 10 years building Marcus's empire alongside him. She had organized his schedule when he was too scattered to remember meetings. She had charmed investors when his arrogance pushed them away. She had held him through panic attacks at 3 a.m. before his first major product launch, whispering that he was brilliant, that he would change the world, that she believed in him. And now he was about to take everything. Very well. Judge Morrison picked up his gavel. In the matter of Blackwell versus Blackwell, based on the evidence of infidelity presented by the defense and the terms of the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties. Marcus turned to his lawyer and raised his hand for a high five. Harrison hesitated. This was wildly inappropriate courtroom behavior, but Marcus grabbed his hand anyway and slapped it loudly. I find in favor of the defendant Marcus Blackwell. The divorce is granted. Mr. Blackwell will retain full ownership of Blackwell Technologies, the marital residence in Pacific Heights, all vehicles and liquid assets totaling. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They exploded inward with a force that made the hinges scream in protest. Every head in the room turned. Marcus's champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. A man stood in the doorway. He was old, late 60s, perhaps 70, but he held himself with the rigid posture of a four-star general. He wore a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. In his right hand, he gripped a polished black cane with a silver wolf's head as the handle, but it was his eyes that commanded attention. They were the color of flint, cold and sharp, and utterly without mercy. They scanned the courtroom with the precision of a predator assessing prey. Behind him stood two younger men in dark suits, each carrying thick leather briefcases. They didn't look like lawyers. They looked like executioners. What the hell? Marcus whipped around. Who let this guy in security? Harrison Cole's face had gone the color of old milk. He grabbed Marcus's arm so hard it would leave bruises. Sit down, Harrison hissed. Sit down right now. What? Why? Who is this old? Sit down. Something in Harrison's voice, raw, genuine fear, made Marcus obey. He dropped into his chair, his earlier triumph evaporating like morning fog. Judge Morrison had frozen with his gavel still raised. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. When he finally spoke, his booming, authoritative voice had been replaced by something almost reverent. Mr. Ashford. The old man didn't respond immediately. He walked down the center aisle, his cane making a measured thud against the carpet with each step. Thud, thud, thud. The rhythm of a death march. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at the judge. He walked straight to the plaintiff's table, straight to the trembling woman in the gray dress. Elena slowly raised her head. For the first time all morning, her expression changed. It wasn't fear. It wasn't relief. It was something far more complicated, shame and gratitude and resignation all tangled together. She stood up. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. Hello, Papa. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Papa, he knew Elena's father. At least he thought he did. He had met the man once 10 years ago at their wedding. A quiet, unassuming man who introduced himself as a retired records keeper for the state library. He had worn a rented tuxedo that didn't fit properly and had spoken maybe 20 words the entire evening before leaving early, mumbling something about a long drive home. Marcus had dismissed him completely. A nobody. A boring old man from flyover country with zero ambition and zero connections. Not worth a second thought. But the man standing in the courtroom now was not a retired librarian. This man radiated power the way a furnace radiates heat. The air around him seemed to crackle with invisible electricity. And the way Judge Morrison was looking at him with a mixture of respect and barely concealed fear told Marcus that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Leora. The old man's voice was deep and gravelly, carrying to every corner of the room without him raising it. You didn't call me. I wanted to handle it myself, Papa. And how is that working out for you? Victor Ashford gestured around the room with his cane, taking in the smug husband, the expensive lawyer, the cowering judge. It appears you're about to be thrown to the wolves, my dear. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a less terrifying face. Fortunately, the wolves work for me. Marcus couldn't stay silent anymore. This was his courtroom, his victory, his moment. Excuse me. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with aggressive precision. "I don't know who you think you are, crashing a private legal proceeding, but this is a closed session. Judge Morrison, I demand this man be removed immediately." Harrison Cole lunged for Marcus's arm again. "For God's sake, sit down, you idiot." Marcus shook him off. "What is wrong with you? He's just some old man. Elena's father is a librarian, for Christ's sake." Victor Ashford turned his flint-gray eyes toward Marcus. The weight of that gaze hit like a physical blow. Marcus felt his throat go dry, his bravado wilting under the intensity of that stare. "A librarian." Victor repeated the word, slowly tasting it. "Yes, I suppose that's what I told you. I do enjoy keeping records." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped to something between a whisper and a growl. "I keep very, very detailed records." He turned to face Judge Morrison. "Richard, it's been a long time. The Morrison corruption case, wasn't it 2001, if I recall correctly?" Judge Morrison swallowed visibly. Every trace of color had left his face. "Mr. Ashford, I wasn't aware you were related to the plaintiff. She uses her husband's name. A mistake we are here to correct." Victor's voice carried the cold finality of a closing coffin lid. "I am entering an appearance on behalf of my daughter Elena Ashford. I am also bringing new counsel." He gestured to the two men behind him. They stepped forward in perfect unison, placing their briefcases on Elena's table with synchronized precision. Patricia Hayes, the court-appointed defender, looked like she might faint. One of the men leaned close and whispered something in her ear, pressing what appeared to be a check into her hand. Her eyes went wide as saucers. She nodded frantically, grabbed her bag, and practically sprinted out of the courtroom. "This is completely irregular," Marcus shouted, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "You can't just swap attorneys in the middle of a verdict. Judge, tell him he can't do this." "I can." Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "And I just did." He looked at Judge Morrison with an expression that made it clear this was not a request. "Your Honor, given the unique circumstances." Judge Morrison was nodding before Victor even finished. "Yes, yes, of course. Given the presence of Mr. Ashford and the introduction of new counsel, I am granting a 1-hour recess." "A recess." Marcus slammed his palm on the table. "You were about to rule in my favor. You can't just 1 hour." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the chamber. "Court is in recess." Judge Morrison practically fled the bench, disappearing through the door to his chambers like a man escaping a burning building. The courtroom dissolved into confused murmurs. Marcus spun on Harrison, grabbing him by the lapels of his expensive jacket. "What the hell is going on? Who is he?" Harrison's face was slick with sweat. His hands were trembling. "You told me her family was nobody, Marcus. You told me she came from nothing." "She did. Her father worked in a library in Chicago. I met him at our wedding. He couldn't even afford a proper suit." Harrison leaned in close, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "Victor Ashford didn't work in a library. He owned the library, and the land it sat on, and the construction company that built it." Marcus felt the floor shifting beneath him. He was the lead prosecutor for the Southern District of California for 20 years before he went into private practice. He's the man who took down the Castellano crime family, single-handedly. They called him the Gavel, because once he brought it down on you, your life was over. Harrison's eyes darted toward the old man, who was now speaking softly with his daughter. "He retired 15 years ago. Disappeared completely. Half the legal community thought he was dead. The other half hoped he was." Marcus looked across the aisle. Elena was still sitting, her head bowed, but her shoulders had straightened slightly. Victor stood over her, one hand resting gently on her shoulder, speaking words too soft to hear. The two new lawyers were already unpacking their briefcases, pulling out thick binders that looked ominous even from across the room. "So he was a prosecutor." Marcus tried to force confidence into his voice. "So what, that was decades ago. He's old, he's retired. The law is the law. We have the prenup. We have the evidence of her cheating. He can't just wave his cane and change facts." Harrison looked at Marcus with something approaching pity. You still don't understand, do you? Men like Victor Ashford don't enter a courtroom unless they already know the outcome. He didn't come here to argue the case, Marcus. Harrison's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He came here to bury you. Marcus looked back at Victor. As if sensing his gaze, the old man looked up. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Victor didn't blink. He held Marcus's stare with the patient stillness of a snake watching a mouse. Then slowly and deliberately, Victor raised one hand. He pressed his index finger against his lips. Silence. It was a simple gesture, almost playful. But it carried a message as clear as a knife to the throat. Be quiet. Be still. Be afraid. And then Victor Ashford smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen. Not because it was cruel or mocking, though it was both, but because it was the smile of absolute certainty. The smile of a man who had already won and was simply waiting for his opponent to realize it. We need to settle. Harrison's voice was urgent, desperate. Right now. We go over there, we offer her half of everything. Maybe he'll let you walk away with the company. Half? Marcus laughed, but it came out high and thin. I'm not giving that woman a single penny more than I have to. I don't care who her daddy is. I'm Marcus Blackwell. I built an empire from nothing. Let the old man try his best. I'll crush him like I crush everyone. He pulled out his phone and fired off a text to his mistress, slight delay. Some old relative showed up. Annoying but harmless. Keep the Dom Perignon on ice. We're still celebrating tonight. Marcus had no idea that his phone had been compromised for the past 48 hours. He had no idea that Victor Ashford had spent 2 days systematically dismantling every hidden account, every offshore shell company, every carefully constructed lie. He had no idea that the harmless old relative possessed evidence that could send Marcus to federal prison for 15 years. The battle hadn't begun. It was already over. Marcus Blackwell was just the last person in the room to know it. The hour felt like 5 minutes to Marcus. When Judge Morrison returned to the bench, something had fundamentally shifted in the courtroom's atmosphere. The air itself seemed heavier charged with the kind of electricity that precedes a devastating storm. Victor Ashford sat at the plaintiff's table with his hands folded calmly in front of him. He hadn't touched his notes. He hadn't conferred with his attorneys. He simply sat there, radiating an almost supernatural patience, his flint-gray eyes fixed on Marcus with the unblinking focus of a predator who had already cornered his prey. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. His voice had lost every trace of its earlier authority. We are back on the record. Mr. Ashford, you indicated during the recess that you have new evidence regarding the allegations of infidelity against your daughter. I do, Your Honor. Victor rose from his chair. He didn't approach the bench. He didn't need to. His presence filled the entire room. My daughter was accused of adultery based on a series of photographs allegedly taken at the Grandview Hotel on the nights of October 14th and 15th. The evidence was presented as conclusive proof of her infidelity. It is conclusive, Marcus blurted out, unable to contain himself. We have time-stamped photos, hotel records, digital forensics. Harrison kicked him hard under the table, but Marcus barely felt it. Victor turned his head slowly, like a tank turret, traversing to acquire a target. His eyes locked onto Marcus with an intensity that made the younger man's words die in his throat. Mr. Blackwell. Victor's voice dropped an octave. Impatience. I remember being young and foolish once. It's a dangerous combination. He snapped his fingers without looking away from Marcus. One of his silent associates stood and handed a thick manila folder to the bailiff, who practically ran it up to the judge. Your Honor, the photographs submitted by Mr. Blackwell's legal team were taken by a private investigator named Raymond Dozier. Mr. Dozier is currently sitting in the hallway outside this courtroom, sweating through his polyester suit, because he knows that by the end of today, he will lose his license and likely face criminal charges. Marcus felt a cold tendril of fear snake through his chest. But we don't need Mr. Dozier's testimony. Victor continued. We have something far more reliable. We have physics. Physics? Marcus couldn't help the scoff that escaped his lips. What does physics have to do with... The photographs show my daughter entering room 402 of the Grandview Hotel. Victor spoke over him as if he hadn't made a sound. The timestamp reads 8:42 p.m. on October 14th. Victor paused, letting the silence stretch. However, if you examine Exhibit A in the folder I just provided, you will find a receipt from a gas station in Santa Monica. The timestamp on that receipt reads 8:45 p.m. on the same evening. The credit card used belonged to Elena. The signature is Elena's. The security camera footage, which I have also included on the flash drive in that folder, clearly shows my daughter purchasing a bottle of water and a protein bar at that exact time. Victor took a single step toward Marcus's table. Now, unless my daughter has discovered the ability to teleport across 43 miles of Los Angeles traffic in 3 minutes, the photographs provided by the defense are fabrications. They are forgeries. They are fraud upon this court. Harrison Cole scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over his chair. Your Honor, My client relied on the investigator's report in good faith. If there were discrepancies in the timestamps, we were not made aware. See. Good faith. Victor's laugh was harsh, devoid of any warmth. Mr. Cole, you are a senior partner at Cole & Associates. You have practiced law in this state for 27 years. Are you truly asking this court to believe that you submitted doctored evidence without performing even the most basic verification? Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Unless, of course, Victor continued, his voice dropping to something just above a whisper. You were instructed to ignore the discrepancies. Instructed by your client. I didn't know, Marcus shouted, rising from his chair. The PI must have made a mistake with the dates. This is his error, not mine. The PI didn't make a mistake, Mr. Blackwell. Victor reached into his jacket and produced a single sheet of paper. Raymond Dozier was paid an additional $5,000 in cash, withdrawn from your personal account, the one you labeled consulting fees, because you thought that made it untraceable to, and I quote from his sworn statement, obtained this morning, enhance the narrative to ensure a favorable outcome. Victor laid the paper on the edge of Marcus's table, close enough for him to read. That's Mr. Dozier's signature at the bottom. Notarized 2 hours ago. He was remarkably cooperative once we explained the penalties for perjury and evidence tampering. Marcus stared at the document. His own bank account number was highlighted in yellow. The withdrawal amount, the date, everything. Your Honor, Victor turned back to the bench. The allegation of infidelity against my daughter is demonstrably false. It is perjury. It is fraud upon this court. It is malicious prosecution designed to strip an innocent woman of her rightful share of marital assets. Judge Morrison's face had hardened into granite. The evidence of Mrs. Blackwell's infidelity is stricken from the record, he announced. The motion to deny spousal support based on this evidence is denied. Mr. Cole, you and your client will be facing a formal inquiry from this court regarding the submission of falsified evidence. Your Honor. Harrison started. I'm not finished, Mr. Cole. Victor raised a hand, and the judge fell silent. With respect, Your Honor, neither am I. Victor gestured to his associates. One of them stood and began setting up a laptop connected to the courtroom's display screen. Since we are discussing infidelity, and since the prenuptial agreement, which I have read thoroughly, and which is a clumsy reproduction of a contract template I wrote in 1987, contains a moral turpitude clause, I believe we should examine the defendant's activities during the marriage. Harrison found his voice. Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition. My client's private life is not on trial here. It is on trial, Victor interrupted, when it affects the division of marital assets, which it does, because Mr. Blackwell didn't merely conduct an extramarital affair. He funded it using money that legally belonged to both parties in the marriage. The display screen flickered to life. A photograph appeared. A young woman, blonde mid-20s, attractive in an obvious way, standing next to a silver Mercedes convertible. Vanessa Chen. Victor read the name without looking at the screen. Executive assistant at Blackwell Technologies, 26 years old, hired 18 months ago despite having no relevant qualifications for the position. Marcus's stomach dropped. That Mercedes C-Class was leased 3 months after Ms. Chen's hiring. The lease was signed by Marcus Blackwell. Monthly payments of $847 drawn from the joint savings account he shared with my daughter. Victor clicked a button. A new image appeared in an apartment building. This is the Marina Towers complex. Unit 1407 has been rented for the past 14 months. Rent $4,200 per month. Paid by a shell company called Coastal Consulting LLC, which is owned entirely by Marcus Blackwell. Another click. A tuition statement. 2 weeks ago, a payment of $37,000 was made to the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising. Ms. Chen is apparently pursuing a degree in interior design. This payment was also drawn from the joint savings account. Victor let the images hang on the screen. In total, Mr. Blackwell has spent approximately $160,000 of marital assets on his mistress over the past 18 months. $160,000 that belonged legally and morally to my daughter as well. Elena, who had been silent throughout, slowly raised her head. Her eyes met Marcus's across the courtroom. "I knew about the car," she said softly. Marcus froze. "What?" "I knew about the Mercedes." Elena's voice was stronger now, steadier. "I saw the bank statement 8 months ago. I saw the lease payment. I knew what it meant." She wiped a single tear from her cheek. "I didn't say anything because I thought if I just tried harder, if I was a better wife, if I lost more weight, wore more makeup, laughed at your jokes more, I thought you would come back to me." Her voice cracked. "I was so stupid." "No, my dear." Victor placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You were loyal. You were loving. You were everything a wife should be." He turned his flint-gray eyes back to Marcus. "He was stupid." Victor addressed the judge once more. The prenuptial agreement contains a standard moral turpitude clause in Section 7, Paragraph 3. It states, and I quote, "In the event that either party engages in conduct that constitutes infidelity, fraud, or moral turpitude, the innocent party shall be entitled to an equitable distribution of all marital assets regardless of any other provisions in this agreement." Victor paused. Mr. Blackwell has committed infidelity. He has committed fraud by fabricating evidence against his wife. He has dissipated marital assets to fund his affair. The prenuptial agreement he has been hiding behind is now void. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "I am inclined to agree, Mr. Ashford. The prenuptial agreement appears to be nullified by Mr. Blackwell's own conduct." "Wait." Marcus stood up so fast, his chair crashed backward. Wait. Fine. The prenup is dead. I don't care." He spread his arms wide, a desperate grin stretching across his face. "Give her half the house. Give her half the cash. Give her the cars, the art, the furniture. I don't care about any of it. Take it all." Marcus pointed at Victor. "But you can't touch my company. Blackwell Technologies is held in a separate trust. It was established before the marriage. It's completely separate from marital assets. My lawyers made sure of that." He laughed, a high, thin sound edged with hysteria. "You can take the furniture, old man. You can take the vacation home. But the company is mine. It will always be mine. It's worth $50 million, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it." Marcus expected to see frustration on Victor's face, perhaps anger, maybe even defeat. Instead, Victor Ashford looked at him with something that resembled sadness. Not for himself, for Marcus. It was the look a hunter gives a deer that doesn't realize it's already been shot. "Oh, Marcus." Victor's voice was soft, almost gentle. "You really should have done your homework on who you married." Victor walked slowly back to the plaintiff's table. He didn't hurry. He had all the time in the world. "The trust," he said, letting the word hang in the air. "Yes, the Blackwell Family Trust established 4 years ago to protect your intellectual property and stock options from unforeseen liabilities. That's the exact phrase your estate attorney used, isn't it? Unforeseen liabilities. Like a divorce." "It's bulletproof," Marcus insisted, though his voice had lost its earlier bravado. "The best estate planners in California designed it." "Your estate planners are competent," Victor acknowledged, "but they are lazy. They used a standard holding structure without examining the original capitalization documents." Victor nodded to his associate, who began pulling up new documents on the screen. "The trust owns Blackwell Technologies. But who funded the trust? Who provided the initial capital that allowed you to build your empire?" "I did." Marcus's chin jutted forward defiantly. "I built this company from nothing. I maxed out credit cards, I worked 20-hour days, You were broke." Victor's voice cut through Marcus's bluster like a scalpel. 10 years ago, when you had your idea for that application, you had $11,000 in debt and a credit score of 540. No bank would lend to you. No venture capitalist would meet with you. You were desperate." Marcus said nothing. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles jumped beneath his skin. And then, miraculously, an angel investor appeared. An anonymous benefactor who provided $200,000 in seed funding. No questions asked. No public acknowledgement required. Victor let the silence stretch until it became painful. "Do you remember signing those documents, Marcus? You were 26 years old. You were so excited to finally have the money you needed that you signed a stack of papers an inch thick without reading past the first page." "Those documents were standard investment agreements," Marcus said. "I've reviewed them since. There's nothing." Page 47. Marcus stopped. "What?" "Page 47, Victor repeated. Paragraph 12, the conversion clause. He picked up a document from the table and began to read aloud. "In the event of dissolution of marriage between the primary beneficiary and any spouse married at the time of this investment, the convertible note shall automatically convert to equity at a rate determined by the company's current valuation, not to exceed 60% of total shares." Victor looked up from the paper. "In plain English, if you got divorced, your anonymous investor would own the majority of your company." Marcus's legs gave out. He dropped into his chair, his face ashen. That's not possible. That clause can't be enforceable. It's unconscionable. No court would—" "Contract law, Mr. Blackwell." Judge Morrison was leaning forward now, studying the documents on his screen. "If your signature is on that agreement, and if the terms were clearly stated, the clause appears binding." "Who—" Marcus's voice came out as a croak. "Who was the investor? Who holds that note?" Victor smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had shown all day. He turned and bowed slightly toward the woman sitting beside him. "May I present the majority shareholder of Blackwell Technologies?" Elena looked up. For a long moment, she seemed just as confused as Marcus. "Papa, I don't understand. I didn't have that kind of money 10 years ago. I was working as a librarian's assistant." "You didn't," Victor agreed gently. "But I did." He took his daughter's hand in his. "Do you remember, Elena, when you came to me all those years ago? You had just met a young man with stars in his eyes and a dream in his heart. You told me he was brilliant. You told me he was going to change the world. You asked me to help him, but you made me promise never to let him know the money came from me." Elena's eyes widened. "You said his ego was fragile. You said he needed to believe he had done it on his own. You loved him so much that you were willing to give him everything and take no credit." Victor squeezed her hand. "I agreed to help, but I am not a foolish man, my dear. I had my attorneys draft that conversion clause as protection. If Marcus honored your love, if he stayed true to you, the money was a gift. He would never even know about the clause." Victor's eyes hardened as he turned back to Marcus. But if he ever betrayed you, if he ever tried to throw you away like garbage, the clause would activate. The debt would come due. With interest. Victor released his daughter's hand and faced the court. Based on the current valuation of Blackwell Technologies, which I have had independently assessed by 3 separate firms this week, and based on the terms of the convertible note which triggers automatically upon the filing of divorce papers. He paused. Elena Ashford does not merely own half the marital assets. Another pause. She owns 60% of Blackwell Technologies. She is the majority shareholder. She controls the board. Victor looked directly at Marcus. She is your boss. No. Marcus lunged to his feet, knocking the table sideways. Papers scattered across the floor. Harrison Cole scrambled backward to avoid being hit. No, 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 this is fraud. This is conspiracy. You can't do this. I can. Victor's voice was ice. I did, 10 years ago. I'll dissolve the company. Marcus screamed, his face purple with rage. I'll burn it to the ground before I let her take it. I'll fire everyone, sell the assets, destroy the code. You can't. Victor took a step toward Marcus, invading his space. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I filed an emergency injunction with the Superior Court. You have been removed as CEO pending a full forensic audit. All your access credentials have been revoked. You cannot enter the building. You cannot access the servers. You cannot send so much as an email from your company account. Marcus staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. An audit what I built the technology. I wrote the code. The company is nothing without me. We're not auditing the code, Marcus. Victor's voice dropped to something just above a whisper, soft, intimate, and absolutely terrifying. We're auditing the tax returns. The color drained from Marcus's face so quickly, he looked like he might pass out. When I was searching for evidence of your fraudulent infidelity claims, I found something interesting. Another set of books. Hidden on a private server you thought no one knew about. Victor began to pace slowly, his cane tapping against the floor. Chimera Holdings, Blue Wave Consulting, Sunset Ventures LLC. Shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, all funneling money from Blackwell Technologies to offshore accounts that you never reported to the IRS. Those are legitimate business expenses, Marcus said, but his voice was trembling. International consulting fees, completely legal. Consulting fees. Victor stopped pacing. For consultants who don't exist. For services never rendered. For invoices that were created on your personal computer and backdated to appear legitimate. He turned to face Marcus directly. That's not creative accounting, Mr. Blackwell. That's tax fraud. Wire fraud. Money laundering. Conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Harrison Cole was already packing his briefcase. Where are you going? Marcus grabbed his lawyer's arm. You can't leave. We're in the middle of... I'm withdrawing as counsel. Harrison pulled his arm away. I can represent you in a divorce proceeding, Marcus. I cannot represent you in a federal tax fraud investigation. I'm not going to prison because you couldn't keep your hands out of the cookie jar. You can't just leave. We have an agreement. I paid you. Sue me. Harrison walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The heavy doors swung shut behind him with a sound like a tomb ceiling. Marcus stood alone at the defendant's table. The courtroom felt massive now, cavernous, swallowing him whole. He looked around desperately at the judge, who regarded him with undisguised contempt. At the court reporter whose fingers had stopped moving over the keys. At the few observers in the gallery who watched with the morbid fascination of people witnessing a car accident. And then he looked at Elena. His wife. His soon-to-be ex-wife. The woman he had dismissed as nothing. The woman he had cheated on, lied to, and tried to destroy. She wasn't shrinking anymore. She sat straight in her chair, her shoulders back, her chin raised. Her eyes met his without flinching. Elena. Marcus's voice cracked. Elena, please. You have to help me. You have to talk to your father. Tell him to stop this. We can work something out. I'll give you whatever you want. The house, the money, anything. Elena said nothing. Baby, please. Marcus took a step toward her. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But this is too much. You're going to destroy me. Is that what you want? To see me in prison? Elena looked at him for a long moment. Do you remember what you said to me this morning, Marcus? Her voice was quiet, controlled. You raised your glass and you called me dead weight. You said you were celebrating finally getting rid of me. You said it loud enough for everyone in this courtroom to hear. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. I spent 10 years of my life loving you, Elena continued. I believed in you when no one else did. I gave you everything. My time, my energy, my father's money, my self-respect. And in return, you called me dead weight. She stood up slowly. You asked if I want to see you destroyed. The truth is, Marcus, I don't want anything from you anymore. I don't want revenge. I don't want satisfaction. I just want to be free. She looked at her father. Papa, can we finish this? Victor nodded. He gestured to his associates, who had been standing silently near the door. Your Honor, I believe we have everything we need to proceed. My daughter is requesting an immediate dissolution of the marriage, full ownership of her 60% stake in Blackwell Technologies, and a restraining order preventing Mr. Blackwell from contacting her or approaching any company property. Granted, Judge Morrison said. All of it. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. We're also prepared to transfer all evidence of financial crimes to the appropriate federal authorities. Victor glanced at Marcus. Unless there's something Mr. Blackwell would like to discuss first. Marcus looked around the courtroom one more time, searching for an escape route, an ally, anything. There was nothing. His lawyer had abandoned him. The judge had turned against him. His wife owned his company, and somewhere out there, federal prosecutors were about to receive a gift-wrapped case that would send him to prison for the next 2 decades. He had walked into this courtroom 2 hours ago, believing he had won everything. Now, he had nothing. Victor Ashford picked up his cane and offered his arm to his daughter. Come, Elena. We have work to do. Your company needs its new CEO. Elena took her father's arm. She walked past Marcus without a second glance, as if he were a stranger she had happened to brush against on the street. The heavy oak doors opened, and they stepped through together, father and daughter, Victor and survivor. Marcus watched them go. And then his knees buckled, and he sank to the floor of the empty courtroom, surrounded by scattered papers and shattered dreams, with nothing but the echo of his own hubris ringing in his ears. Marcus didn't know how long he sat on the floor of the empty courtroom. The bailiff had to physically help him to his feet. The court reporter had packed up her equipment and left without a word. Even the janitor who came to straighten the chairs gave him a wide berth, as if failure were contagious. When Marcus finally stumbled out of the courthouse, the Los Angeles sun hit him like an accusation. Everything was too bright, too loud, too real. His phone was buzzing incessantly in his pocket, but he couldn't bring himself to look at it. He made it 3 steps down the courthouse stairs before his legs gave out again. He sat down hard on the concrete, his expensive Italian suit grinding against the dirty stone, and pulled out his phone with trembling fingers. 47 missed calls. 112 text messages. His email notification showed 847 unread messages and climbing. The first text was from Vanessa. Marcus, what the hell is happening? TMZ just posted something about you and fraud. Call me now. The second text was also from Vanessa. I just tried to use the card at Neiman Marcus. It was declined. Fix this. The third text was from his mother. Marcus Anthony Blackwell. You call me this instant. What have you done? The fourth text was from his CFO at Blackwell Technologies. Feds are here. They have a warrant. Where are you? What do we do? Marcus's hands were shaking so badly he dropped the phone. It clattered down 2 steps before coming to rest face up, still buzzing with incoming notifications. He didn't pick it up. Instead, he sat there on the courthouse steps while people streamed past him. Lawyers with briefcases, defendants with worried faces, families clutching each other for support, and tried to remember how to breathe. 2 hours ago, he had been a titan of industry, CEO of a $50 million company. A man who commanded respect, demanded obedience, and got whatever he wanted through sheer force of will. Now he was sitting on dirty concrete watching pigeons fight over a discarded hot dog, while his entire life burned down around him. His phone rang again. This time the name on the screen made him grab it. Vanessa Chen. Vanessa. His voice came out hoarse, desperate. Baby, listen to me. I can explain everything. It's a misunderstanding. Elena's father is some kind of psychopath who... Shut up, Marcus. Her voice was ice. Pure crystalline ice. I'm at the apartment right now packing my things. The landlord already called. The rent check bounced. The lease is being terminated at the end of the month. That's impossible. I set up automatic payments from what account, Marcus? The one the feds just froze, or the one your wife apparently owns now? Marcus flinched at the word wife. She's not my wife anymore. The divorce is final. And I'm going to fight this, Vanessa. I have lawyers. Your lawyer walked out on you on live television. What? There were cameras in the courthouse, you idiot. Someone leaked footage. Harrison Cole abandoning you in the middle of the hearing is trending on Twitter right now. You're a meme, Marcus. You're a goddamn meme. Marcus felt the world tilting sideways. I don't understand. How did anyone get footage the hearing was supposed to be closed? I don't care how it happened. I care that my name is going to be attached to this disaster. I care that I've been sleeping with a man who is about to go to federal prison. I'm not going to prison. Marcus tried to inject confidence into his voice. This is all a bluff. Elena's father is just trying to scare me into a settlement. Once everyone calms down... Marcus. Vanessa's voice softened, but not with compassion, with pity. The same pity you'd show a dog that was about to be put down. I saw the documents. They're all over the internet now. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the fake invoices. It's not a bluff. You're finished. Vanessa, please. I need you. You're the only person I can count on right now. Just come pick me up. We can go to the beach house in Malibu and figure this out together. The beach house is a marital asset. Remember, your wife owns it now. Or did you forget that in the last 20 minutes? Marcus squeezed his eyes shut. Baby, please. I love you. I was going to leave Elena for you. I was going to marry you. We were going to travel the world together. You were going to use me, Marcus, just like you used her. The difference is, I'm smart enough to get out before I lose everything. Click. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone in his hand. The screen was cracked from when he'd dropped it. A thin spider web of fractured glass spread across Vanessa's contact photo. A selfie she'd taken on his yacht last summer, her blonde hair blowing in the wind, her smile promising everything and nothing. He was still staring at it when a shadow fell across him. Mr. Blackwell. Marcus looked up. A woman stood over him. She was middle-aged, wearing a navy blue windbreaker with yellow letters across the chest, FBI. Behind her stood two more agents, both men, both with the same neutral expression of professional detachment. Mr. Blackwell, I'm Special Agent Catherine Reyes. We need to ask you some questions about your financial holdings. Marcus scrambled to his feet so fast he nearly fell back down. I want a lawyer. You're entitled to have one present during questioning, yes. Agent Reyes's voice was calm, almost bored. But first, we need you to come with us. There's been a significant amount of evidence turned over to our office in the last hour, and we need to discuss it. Evidence from who? Victor Ashford. Whatever he gave you is fabricated. He's trying to destroy me because I divorced his daughter. The evidence was turned over by the new majority shareholder of Blackwell Technologies. Agent Reyes consulted a small notebook. And Elena Ashford, formerly Elena Blackwell. She has granted us full access to company servers, financial records, and digital communications. Marcus felt his heart stop. She can't do that. She doesn't have authorization. She owns 60% of the company, Mr. Blackwell. She has authorization to do whatever she wants. The two male agents moved to flank Marcus. They didn't touch him, but their positioning made it clear that running wasn't an option. "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet." Agent Reyes pocketed her notebook. "Right now, you're just a person of interest. But I'd strongly suggest you cooperate. The evidence we've received is comprehensive." Marcus thought about running anyway. His legs tensed. His eyes darted to the street, calculating distances, escape routes. But then he saw the news van pulling up at the curb. A cameraman was already jumping out, hoisting a heavy camera onto his shoulder. A reporter, a young woman with perfect hair and hungry eyes, was speed-walking toward the courthouse steps with a microphone in her hand. "Mr. Blackwell. Mr. Blackwell. Can you comment on the allegations of tax fraud? Is it true your wife now controls your company? Are you going to prison?" More vans were arriving. More cameras. More microphones. Within seconds, Marcus was surrounded by a swarm of reporters shouting questions, their voices blending into a cacophony of accusation. "Mr. Blackwell, did you really pay someone to fake photographs of your wife?" "Marcus over here. How do you respond to claims that you embezzled millions from your own company? Is it true your mistress has already left you?" Agent Reyes stepped in front of Marcus, shielding him from the cameras with her body. "Mr. Blackwell, the car. Now." For once in his life, Marcus didn't argue. He let the agents guide him down the steps, through the gauntlet of reporters, and into a waiting black SUV. The door slammed shut, cutting off the noise. And suddenly, Marcus was sitting in cool, air-conditioned silence, his ears ringing. Agent Reyes climbed into the front passenger seat. "Buckle up, Mr. Blackwell. We have a lot to discuss." The SUV pulled away from the curb, and Marcus watched through the tinted windows as the courthouse receded into the distance. The reporters were still there, filming the vehicle's departure, already crafting their narratives for the evening news. Marcus slumped back against the leather seat. 12 hours ago, he had been planning a trip to Cabo. He had been picking out champagne to celebrate his divorce. He had been texting his mistress about the jewelry he was going to buy her. Now, he was in the back of an FBI vehicle, watching his entire life collapse in real time on the news crawl at the bottom of the driver's phone screen. Tech CEO facing fraud charges. Wife takes control of company. Shocking courtroom revelations. The SUV turned onto the freeway, heading toward downtown. Marcus closed his eyes, and for the first time since he could remember, Marcus Blackwell began to pray. The FBI field office was a maze of gray cubicles and fluorescent lighting. Marcus was led through corridors that all looked identical past agents who didn't look up from their computers into a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. It was cold. Deliberately cold. The kind of cold designed to make you uncomfortable, to keep you off balance, to remind you that you were not in control. Marcus sat in the hard metal chair and tried to remember every crime drama he'd ever watched. Don't say anything without a lawyer. Don't volunteer information. Don't show weakness. Agent Reyes sat across from him, a thick folder on the table between them. "You sure you don't want to talk, Mr. Blackwell?" Sometimes cooperation in the early stages can make a significant difference in how things play out. "I want a lawyer, and that's your right." She opened the folder and began flipping through pages. "While we wait for your attorney, why don't I just show you what we're looking at?" She pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. It was a screenshot of a spreadsheet. Marcus recognized it immediately. It was from his private server, the one he kept in his home office. The one that required 3 different passwords and a biometric scan to access. This is what we call your shadow ledger. It documents every transaction you've made through your offshore accounts for the past 6 years. Marcus said nothing. Chimera Holdings received 14 wire transfers totaling $3.7 million. Blue Wave Consulting received another $2.1 million. Sunset Ventures got $1.8. Agent Reyes looked up from the papers. "None of these companies have employees, Mr. Blackwell. None of them have office addresses. None of them have ever provided any actual services to Blackwell Technologies." Marcus kept his mouth shut. They're shells. Empty vessels you created to funnel money out of your company and away from the IRS. She pulled out another document. This is your corporate tax return from last year. You reported net profits of $12 million. But according to your shadow ledger, the actual profit was closer to $19 million. She let that number hang in the air. $7 million in unreported income. In a single year. That's not a mistake, Mr. Blackwell. That's not a misunderstanding with your accountant. That's deliberate, systematic tax fraud. Marcus's lawyer arrived 45 minutes later. His name was Gerald Hoffman, a white-haired veteran of white-collar criminal defense who charged $4,000 an hour and was worth every penny. He was the only person Marcus had been able to reach after his regular attorney abandoned him. "Don't say another word," Gerald instructed as he took the seat next to Marcus. He turned to Agent Reyes. "What are we looking at?" "At minimum tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. If we can prove he used company resources to facilitate these schemes, add embezzlement. If any of the wire transfers crossed international borders, which they did, we're looking at potential RICO violations." Gerald absorbed this without visible reaction. "What kind of deal is on the table?" "That depends entirely on how cooperative your client wants to be." Agent Reyes leaned back in her chair. "We're not actually that interested in Mr. Blackwell. He's a big fish, sure. But there are bigger fish. We have reason to believe his offshore accounts were set up through a network that services dozens of high-net-worth individuals engaging in similar schemes." She looked directly at Marcus. "Give us the names. Give us the network. Help us understand how this operation works, and we can talk about reduced charges, maybe even no prison time." Marcus looked at Gerald. Gerald's face was carefully neutral. "Can we have a moment alone?" Agent Reyes nodded and left the room. The moment the door closed, Gerald turned to Marcus. "Tell me everything. And I mean everything. I can't help you if I don't know what we're dealing with." Marcus took a deep breath, and then he started talking. He told Gerald about the offshore accounts, how he'd set them up 5 years ago, when his company first started making real money. How he'd been introduced to a consultant at a party in the Hamptons who specialized in tax optimization strategies for successful entrepreneurs. He told him about the shell companies, the fake invoices, the elaborate paper trail designed to make everything look legitimate. He told him about the private investigator he'd hired to manufacture evidence against Elena about the kickbacks he'd paid to a corrupt accountant who helped cook the books. He told him everything. When he finally stopped talking, Gerald was silent for a long moment. "The good news," Gerald said slowly, "is that you're probably not going to get the maximum sentence. You're not violent, you don't have a criminal record, and if we cooperate with the investigation into this larger network, we can negotiate." "What's the bad news?" "The bad news is that you're almost certainly going to prison. The question is whether it's 5 years or 15. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. 5 years? Best case scenario. If we give them everything, if we help them take down the bigger players, if you plead guilty and show genuine remorse, 5 years in a minimum security facility. Maybe less with good behavior. And worst case. You go to trial, get convicted on all counts, and spend the next decade and a half in a federal penitentiary. Gerald's voice was matter-of-fact. That's assuming they don't find anything else, which, given the thoroughness of the evidence turned over by your ex-wife's family, seems unlikely. Marcus stared at the table. How did he get into my servers? The security was state-of-the-art. Military-grade encryption. There's no way. Mr. Blackwell. Gerald's voice was tired. Your password was Marcus1. Marcus looked up. What? Your password for the Shadow Ledger server. The one with military-grade encryption. Gerald pulled out a piece of paper from his own briefcase. According to the affidavit submitted by Victor Ashford's forensic team, they cracked it in 6 minutes. Your password was your own name, followed by the number 1. Marcus's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. I thought I changed it. You thought wrong. Gerald stood up and gathered his papers. I'm going to go talk to the prosecutors, see what kind of deal we can put together. My advice: start thinking about which of your former associates you're willing to give up. The more names you provide, the better your outcome. Gerald knocked on the door. An agent opened it from the outside. One more thing, Gerald said, pausing in the doorway. Your ex-wife is holding a press conference at the Blackwell Technologies headquarters in 2 hours. She's announcing herself as the new CEO and promising a full internal audit and cooperation with federal authorities. Marcus felt his stomach lurch. She's doing a press conference. She's doing more than that. Gerald's voice carried a note of reluctant admiration. She's systematically dismantling everything you built and rebuilding it in her own image. By tomorrow morning, there won't be a trace of Marcus Blackwell left at that company. Gerald walked out. The door closed behind him with a heavy click. And Marcus was alone again, in a cold gray room, with nothing but the humming of fluorescent lights and the wreckage of his own arrogance for company. The hours that followed were a blur of interrogations, paperwork, and negotiations. Marcus gave them names. He gave them account numbers. He gave them everything they asked for, and then he gave them more, desperate to shave months or years off whatever sentence was coming. By the time night fell, a preliminary deal was in place. Marcus would plead guilty to 3 counts of tax fraud and 1 count of wire fraud. In exchange for his cooperation with the ongoing investigation, the prosecutors would recommend a sentence of 6 to 8 years with eligibility for parole after 4 years. Marcus would be 42 when he got out. Still young enough to start over. Maybe. But as he sat in the holding cell that night, because his assets were frozen and he couldn't make bail, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena's face. Not the broken woman he'd sneered at in the courtroom that morning, but the new Elena. The one who had stood up straight, looked him in the eye, and walked out without a backward glance. He thought about the last 10 years of his life. He thought about the way he'd treated her. The dismissiveness, the cruelty, the 1,000 small humiliations he'd inflicted because he could, because it made him feel powerful, because she was too kind to fight back. He thought about the day he'd come home and told her he wanted a divorce. The shock on her face, the tears she'd tried to hide, the way she'd asked, her voice barely a whisper, "Is there someone else?" He'd laughed at her. He'd actually laughed. "Someone else, baby. There's a whole world full of someone else's. You were just the first one dumb enough to say yes." Those words, those exact words. He'd thought he was so clever, so cutting, so superior. Now lying on a thin mattress in a federal holding cell, with the taste of cheap coffee and regret coating his tongue, Marcus finally understood something he'd never grasped before. Elena hadn't stayed with him because she was weak. She'd stayed because she loved him. Really, truly loved him in a way that he had never been capable of loving anyone or anything except himself. And in the end, that love was the very thing that had destroyed him. Because if Victor Ashford hadn't loved his daughter just as fiercely, if he hadn't spent 10 years quietly preparing for the moment when Marcus would finally show his true colors, none of this would have happened. Marcus would have gotten away with everything. He would have walked out of that courtroom with his fortune intact and his reputation unsullied. He would have flown to Cabo with Vanessa. He would have drunk champagne on his yacht and laughed about the stupid ex-wife he'd finally gotten rid of. But Victor had been watching. Victor had been waiting. Victor had built a trap so elegant, so perfectly constructed, that Marcus had walked right into it without ever knowing it was there. And now Marcus was going to spend the next 4 to 8 years of his life paying for his own blindness. He rolled over on the thin mattress and stared at the concrete ceiling. Somewhere out there, Elena was sleeping in his bed, in his house, in his life. No, in her bed, her house, her life. It had never really been his at all. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in front of a federal judge and said the 2 words he never thought would cross his lips. Guilty, Your Honor. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and a handful of former colleagues who had come to watch the final act of Marcus Blackwell's spectacular downfall. The cameras weren't allowed inside, but Marcus could see them through the windows, a forest of lenses pointed at the courthouse doors waiting to capture his walk of shame. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a 63-year-old woman with silver hair and a reputation for harsh sentences, peered down at him over her reading glasses. Mr. Blackwell, you understand that by pleading guilty to these charges, you are waiving your right to a trial by jury. You understand that this plea cannot be withdrawn once I accept it. Yes, Your Honor. And you are entering this plea voluntarily without coercion or undue pressure from the prosecution. Marcus glanced at Gerald, who gave him a small nod. Yes, Your Honor, voluntarily. Judge Hendricks shuffled through the papers in front of her. The defendant has pled guilty to 3 counts of tax fraud and 1 count of wire fraud. The prosecution has recommended a sentence of 6 to 8 years in federal prison with eligibility for parole after 4 years in exchange for the defendant's cooperation with ongoing investigations. She looked up at Marcus. Before I accept this plea and move to sentencing, is there anything you wish to say to the court? Marcus had prepared a statement. Gerald had helped him write it full of remorse, full of apologies, designed to make him seem human and sympathetic. He had memorized every word. But when he opened his mouth, something different came out. I want to apologize to my ex-wife. The words hung in the air. Even Gerald looked surprised. Elena Ashford. Marcus's voice cracked. I spent 10 years treating her like she was beneath me. I cheated on her. I lied to her. I tried to destroy her reputation with fabricated evidence. I called her worthless. I called her dead weight. He paused, struggling to maintain his composure. She was none of those things. She was loyal. She was kind. She believed in me when no one else did, and I repaid her by trying to throw her away like garbage. Marcus looked at the gallery. Elena wasn't there. He hadn't expected her to be, but somehow he needed to say this anyway. I'm not apologizing because I want a lighter sentence. I'm not apologizing because my lawyer told me to. I'm apologizing because I finally understand what I did. I had everything a man could want, a successful company, a beautiful home, a wife who loved me, and I destroyed it all because I thought I deserved more. I thought I was special. I thought the rules didn't apply to me. He turned back to Judge Hendricks. I was wrong, Your Honor, about everything, and I accept whatever punishment this court decides to give me. The courtroom was silent. Judge Hendricks studied him for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable. Mr. Blackwell. In my 31 years on the bench, I have heard a great many apologies. Most of them are hollow. Most of them are calculated. Most of them are designed to manipulate the court into leniency. She leaned forward. I cannot say whether your apology is sincere. Only time will tell. But I can say this: the crimes you committed were not victimless. You stole from your wife. You stole from your company. You stole from the American taxpayers. And you attempted to use the legal system itself as a weapon to destroy an innocent woman. Her voice hardened. The prosecution has recommended 6 to 8 years. I am rejecting that recommendation. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. I am sentencing you to 10 years in federal prison with eligibility for parole after 6. You will also pay restitution in the amount of $4.7 million, representing the estimated taxes you evaded, plus penalties and interest. 10 years. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. Gerald was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, the defendant has fully cooperated with. The defendant also showed a pattern of deliberate calculated cruelty toward his spouse that this court finds deeply troubling. Judge Hendricks cut him off. The fabricated evidence, the doctored photographs, the systematic campaign to portray an innocent woman as an adulteress. These are not the actions of someone who made a mistake, Mr. Cole. These are the actions of someone who believed he could manipulate the world to suit his desires without consequence. She looked at Marcus one final time. "Mr. Blackwell, you asked for leniency. You asked me to consider your cooperation, your remorse, your apology. I have considered them, and I have concluded that while you may be sorry you got caught, I am not convinced you are sorry for what you did." She brought down her gavel. Court is adjourned. The transport van that took Marcus to the Federal Correctional Institution was cold and windowless. He sat on a metal bench with his wrists cuffed in front of him, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was slightly too large and smelled like industrial detergent. There were 3 other men in the van. None of them spoke. None of them made eye contact. The drive took 4 hours. When the van finally stopped and the doors opened, Marcus stepped out into blinding sunlight. The prison rose before him, a sprawling complex of concrete and razor wire that would be his home for the next 6 to 10 years. A guard grabbed his arm. "Welcome to Lompoc, Blackwell. Try not to cause trouble, and you might actually survive." The intake process was designed to strip away everything that made you human. They took his clothes, his watch, his wedding ring, though he supposed that last one didn't matter anymore. They photographed him. They fingerprinted him. They made him shower with harsh soap while guards watched to make sure he didn't have anything hidden in places he didn't want to think about. And then they gave him a number. Inmate 47291-112. That was his name now. Not Marcus Blackwell. Not the CEO of a $50 million company. Not the man who had once commanded rooms full of investors with a single word. 47291-112. A number in a system that processed thousands of numbers just like him every year. His cell was 8 feet by 10 feet. A metal bunk bed with a thin mattress. A stainless steel toilet with no seat. A small desk bolted to the wall. A window the size of a paperback book that let in just enough light to remind you what you were missing. His cellmate was a man named Darnell, who had been convicted of securities fraud 3 years earlier. Darnell was surprisingly friendly, middle-aged, soft-spoken, with reading glasses perched on his nose as he worked through a stack of legal documents. "First night's the hardest," Darnell said, not looking up from his papers. "After that, it just becomes routine." Marcus sat on the bottom bunk and stared at the concrete wall. "How do you do it? How do you just accept it?" Darnell finally looked up. "Accept what? That I'm here. That I'm going to be here for another 4 years. That by the time I get out, my kids will be grown and my wife will have moved on." He shrugged. "You don't accept it, man. You just survive it. 1 day at a time. 1 hour at a time. You find something to keep your mind busy. I'm working on my appeal, not that it's going anywhere, and you don't let yourself think too far ahead." Marcus nodded slowly. "Does it get easier?" "No." Darnell returned to his papers. "But you get stronger, or you break. Those are the only 2 options in here." Marcus lay back on the thin mattress and closed his eyes. 1 day at a time. 1 hour at a time. He could do this. He had to do this. Because for the first time in his life, Marcus Blackwell had no other choice. The months that followed were a slow education in humility. Marcus learned to wake at 5 a.m. for the morning count. He learned to eat whatever the cafeteria served without complaint. He learned to avoid certain areas of the yard where the wrong kind of men gathered. He learned to keep his head down, his mouth shut, and his expectations low. He got a job in the prison library, ironic, given that he had dismissed his ex-father-in-law as just a librarian all those years ago. It paid 12 cents an hour, barely enough to buy a candy bar from the commissary, but it gave him something to do with his endless days. He read books, hundreds of books. Business books at first, planning for the comeback he would make when he got out. Then history books, biographies, novels. He read everything he could get his hands on, trying to fill the empty hours, trying to keep his mind from circling back to everything he had lost. He tried not to think about Elena. He failed. Every night, lying in his bunk while Darnell snored above him, Marcus would find his thoughts drifting back to her. Not the Elena from the courtroom, The one who had stood straight and walked away without looking back, but the Elena from before. The woman who had laughed at his terrible jokes. The woman who had rubbed his shoulders when he was stressed. The woman who had believed in him so completely that she had asked her own father to fund his dreams. He had thrown all of that away. For what? For Vanessa, who had abandoned him the moment his credit card stopped working. For the offshore accounts that were now being used as evidence against a dozen other fraudsters. For the company that Elena now ran more successfully than he ever had. Gerald came to visit once a month, bringing updates from the outside world. The news was never good for Marcus anyway. Blackwell Technologies posted record profits last quarter. Gerald reported during one visit 6 months into Marcus's sentence. Elena has restructured the entire executive team. She brought in a new CFO, a woman from Goldman Sachs. Stock price is up 47% since she took over. Marcus absorbed this information in silence. She's doing interviews now. Business magazines, podcasts, even a TEDx talk. Everyone wants to hear the story of the quiet wife who turned out to be a brilliant businesswoman. Is she... Marcus hesitated. Is she happy? Gerald looked uncomfortable. Marcus, I don't think that's information I should... Please, I just want to know if she's okay. Gerald sighed. From what I can tell, yes. She's thriving, actually. She sold the house in Pacific Heights, too many bad memories apparently, and bought a place in Sausalito. She's dating someone. An architect, I think. Marcus felt something twist in his chest, but it wasn't jealousy. Not exactly. It was something more like relief, the strange comfort of knowing that the person you hurt had somehow managed to heal. Good, Marcus said quietly. That's good. She deserves to be happy. Gerald studied his client for a long moment. You've changed, Marcus. What do you mean? The man I met a year ago would have been furious to hear that his ex-wife was succeeding without him. He would have demanded to know how he could sabotage her somehow. He would have been plotting his revenge. Marcus shook his head slowly. I'm done with revenge. I'm done with plotting. I'm done with thinking the world owes me something. He looked at his hands, soft now, uncalloused by any real work he'd ever done. I had everything, Gerald. Everything. And I destroyed it because I couldn't see past my own ego. So what now? Marcus was quiet for a long time. Now I try to become someone who deserves a second chance. I don't know if I'll ever get one, but I can at least try to become someone who would be worthy of it. Gerald nodded slowly. I'll see you next month, Marcus. After Gerald left, Marcus returned to the library and his endless shelves of books. But this time, instead of reaching for a business manual or a biography of some successful titan of industry, he picked up something different. A book about forgiveness. He didn't know if Elena would ever forgive him. He didn't know if he would ever forgive himself. But he figured he had to start somewhere, and somewhere in a quiet corner of his broken heart, Marcus Blackwell began the long, slow process of learning how to be a human being. The seasons changed outside Marcus's tiny window, though inside the prison time moved differently. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. Marcus kept his head down. He did his job in the library. He attended anger management classes, financial literacy courses, and eventually a program designed to help white-collar criminals understand the real-world impact of their crimes. That last one hit harder than he expected. They brought in victims. Real people who had lost real money to fraud and embezzlement. A retired teacher whose pension had been decimated by a Ponzi scheme. A small business owner who had lost everything to a crooked accountant. A widow whose husband's life insurance had been stolen by an identity thief. Marcus listened to their stories with his head bowed and his hands clasped in his lap. These weren't his victims, not directly, but they could have been. Every fraudster in that room had created ripples that spread far beyond the immediate crime. Every lie, every stolen dollar, every manipulation had damaged the fabric of trust that held society together. Marcus thought about his own victims. Elena, obviously, but also the employees at Blackwell Technologies who had unknowingly been working for a criminal enterprise, the shareholders who had bought stock based on fraudulent financials, the IRS agents who had to spend countless hours unraveling his schemes instead of catching other criminals, even the American taxpayers who had to make up the difference when people like Marcus refused to pay their fair share. After the victim impact session, Marcus went back to his cell and sat on his bunk in the dark for a long time. Darnell, who had been released 6 months earlier, was gone. Marcus had a new cellmate now, a quiet man named Thomas, who was serving time for bank fraud. Thomas mostly kept to himself, which suited Marcus fine. "You okay, man?" Thomas asked from the top bunk. "You've been sitting there for like 2 hours." "Just thinking." "About what?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "About all the people I hurt. About whether there's any way to make it right." Thomas was silent. Then, "Some things you can't make right. Some things you just have to carry." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "It's supposed to make you realistic." Thomas's voice was matter-of-fact. "You can't undo the past, Blackwell. You can only decide what kind of person you want to be going forward." Marcus lay back on his mattress and stared at the bottom of the bunk above him. What kind of person did he want to be? For 40 years he had been Marcus Blackwell, genius entrepreneur, master of the universe. He had defined himself by his success, his wealth, his power. He had looked at people like Elena, kind, patient, selfless people, and seen them as suckers. Easy marks, people to be used and discarded. Now all of that was gone. The success, the wealth, the power stripped away. And what was left? Just a man in an orange jumpsuit trying to figure out who he was without all the things he had used to define himself. It wasn't comfortable, this process of self-examination. It was painful, like cleaning out a wound that had festered for decades. But somewhere in that pain, Marcus began to find something he hadn't expected: clarity. He had been so busy building his empire that he had never stopped to ask why. Why did he need more money when he already had more than he could spend? Why did he need a younger, more attractive mistress when he had a wife who loved him? Why did he need to crush everyone around him when collaboration might have made everyone, including himself, more successful? The answer, he realized, was fear. He had been terrified that he wasn't good enough. Terrified that people would see through his confident facade to the insecure kid from a middle-class family who was desperately trying to prove himself. Terrified that if he ever stopped accumulating money, power, women's success, he would be revealed as the fraud he had always secretly believed himself to be. And so, he had kept grabbing, kept taking, kept destroying anyone who threatened his carefully constructed image, including the one person who had seen through all of that and loved him anyway. Elena had never cared about his money. She had never been impressed by his power. She had loved him for the person she believed he could be, the person he had never actually tried to become. And he had punished her for that. He had punished her for loving him because her love made him feel the gap between who he was and who he pretended to be. Marcus closed his eyes. "I'm sorry, Elena," he whispered into the darkness. "I'm so sorry." The words disappeared into the silence of the cell. No one heard them. Nothing changed. But somehow saying them out loud made Marcus feel like he had taken the first step on a very long road. A road he didn't know the end of, but one he was finally willing to walk. 2 years and 3 months into his sentence, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. He was in the library shelving books on accounting. The irony never quite wore off when a guard appeared at the door. "Blackwell, visitor." Marcus frowned. Gerald wasn't scheduled until next week. His mother had stopped coming after the first year, unable to face the shame. And there was no one else. He followed the guard to the visiting room, expecting some kind of administrative mix-up. Then he saw who was waiting for him. Victor Ashford sat on the other side of the plexiglass partition, his silver wolf head cane resting against the counter. He looked exactly the same as he had in the courtroom 3 years ago. Impeccable suit, flint gray eyes, an aura of quiet power that made the guards give him a wide berth. Marcus stopped in his tracks. "What are you doing here?" Victor picked up the phone on his side of the partition. Marcus, moving slowly, did the same. "I came to verify." "Verify what?" "That you're still alive." Victor's voice was as cold and precise as Marcus remembered. "I wanted to see for myself." Marcus sat down heavily. "If you came to gloat, you wasted a trip. There's nothing left to gloat about." "I didn't come to gloat, Mr. Blackwell. I came because my daughter asked me to." Marcus's heart stopped. "Elena. She asked you to come here. Don't misunderstand." Victor's expression didn't change. "She doesn't want to see you. She doesn't want to speak to you. She has moved on with her life, and you are not part of it." "Then why?" "She asked me to come because she wanted to know if you had changed." Victor studied Marcus through the scratched plexiglass. "She has heard things. From your lawyer, from the prison administration. Reports that you've been a model inmate, that you've been participating in rehabilitation programs, that you've been helping other inmates with their legal research in the library." Marcus said nothing. "She wanted to know if it was real or if it was just another performance, another manipulation designed to get you something you want." "What did you tell her?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. "I told her I didn't know. I told her I would have to see for myself." He leaned forward slightly. "So tell me, Marcus Blackwell, have you changed, or are you the same man who tried to destroy my daughter 3 years ago?" Marcus thought about the question. Really thought about it. "I don't know," he said finally. "I think I have. I feel different. I see things differently. But I also know that I spent 40 years lying to everyone, including myself. So how can I be sure that I'm not lying now?" He met Victor's eyes. "The truth is, I won't know if I've really changed until I get out of here, until I'm back in the real world facing real temptations, making real choices. That's when I'll find out who I've become." Victor studied him for a long time. His expression was unreadable. "That," Victor said slowly, "is the first honest thing I've ever heard you say." He stood up and reached for his cane. "Wait." Marcus pressed his hand against the glass. Is Elena happy?" Victor paused. "Yes, she is." "Good." Marcus's voice cracked. "That's good. That's all I wanted to know." Victor looked at him for one final moment, and then so briefly that Marcus almost missed it. Something shifted in those flint gray eyes. Not warmth exactly, not forgiveness, but something that might have been acknowledgement. "Goodbye, Mr. Blackwell." Victor hung up the phone and walked out of the visiting room without looking back. Marcus sat there for a long time after he was gone, his hand still pressed against the cold glass, watching the empty chair where his ex-wife's father had been. She had asked about him. After everything he had done, after all the ways he had hurt her, Elena had still asked about him. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't anything close to what Marcus had once had and thrown away. But it was something. And right now, something was more than Marcus Blackwell deserved. 6 years, 4 months, and 17 days. That was how long Marcus Blackwell spent behind bars before the parole board finally decided he had paid enough of his debt to society. 6 years of waking at 5 a.m. for count. 6 years of cafeteria food and communal showers and the constant grinding monotony of institutional life. 6 years of watching the seasons change through a window the size of a paperback book. On the morning of his release, Marcus stood at the prison gates with a paper bag containing his personal effects. A cracked watch, $47 in cash, and the clothes he had worn to his sentencing hearing, now 2 sizes too big on his diminished frame. The guard who processed him out barely looked up from his paperwork. "Good luck out there, Blackwell. Try not to come back." "I won't." Marcus meant it. For the first time in his life, he meant something completely. The gates opened and Marcus stepped through into the California sunshine. The air smelled different on this side of the fence, cleaner somehow. Freer. He stood there for a long moment, just breathing, letting the reality of his liberation sink into his bones. A car was waiting in the parking lot. Gerald Hoffman leaned against the hood, looking older than Marcus remembered. "You look terrible," Gerald said by way of greeting. "You look expensive." Marcus glanced at Gerald's suit, still charging $4,000 an hour. "5 now. Inflation." Gerald opened the passenger door. "Get in. We have a lot to discuss." They drove in silence for the first few miles. Marcus stared out the window at a world that had continued turning without him. New buildings had gone up. Old ones had come down. The freeway had been expanded. Everything was different, and yet somehow exactly the same. "So," Gerald said finally, "what's the plan?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I need a job." "With your record." "That's going to be difficult." "I know, but I have to start somewhere." Marcus turned to look at his lawyer. "I've been thinking about this for 6 years, Gerald. I don't want to go back to tech. I don't want to start another company. I don't want any of the things I used to want." "Then what do you want?" Marcus considered the question. "I want to help people. People like me, white-collar criminals, fraudsters, the ones who thought they were too smart to get caught. I want to help them see what I see now. That the money isn't worth it. That the power isn't worth it. That you can have everything in the world and still end up with nothing if you don't have integrity." Gerald raised an eyebrow. "You want to be a counselor for convicted criminals?" "I want to be whatever will let me make a difference. I spent 40 years taking. Now I want to spend whatever time I have left giving back." Gerald was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him in years. "You really have changed, haven't you?" "I guess we'll find out." The next few months were harder than prison. At least in prison, Marcus had a routine. He had meals provided, a bed assigned, a schedule dictated by forces beyond his control. Out in the real world, he had to build everything from scratch. He found a room in a halfway house in Oakland, a far cry from the Pacific Heights mansion he had once called home. His roommate was a recovering meth addict named Danny, who talked in his sleep and left dirty dishes in the sink. The bathroom was shared by 6 people. The walls were thin enough that Marcus could hear every argument, every phone call, every moment of despair from the other residents. He took a job at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated people find employment. The pay was barely enough to cover his rent and food, but the work was meaningful. Every day, he sat across from men and women who had made the same mistakes he had, and he tried to help them see a path forward. Some of them listened. Some of them didn't. Some of them went back to prison within months of their release, caught in the same cycles of desperation and poor choices that had landed them there in the first place. But some of them made it. Some of them found jobs, rebuilt relationships, became productive members of society. And every time one of them succeeded, Marcus felt something he had never experienced in all his years of accumulating wealth and power. Fulfillment. Real, genuine fulfillment. The kind that didn't depend on external validation or material possessions. The kind that came from knowing you had made a difference in someone's life. A year after his release, Marcus received a letter. It arrived at the halfway house on a Tuesday afternoon, mixed in with the usual junk mail and bills. The envelope was expensive, heavy cream paper, the kind you didn't buy at a drugstore. There was no return address. Marcus opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a few handwritten lines. "I heard you've been doing good work. I'm glad. Maybe there was something worth saving in you after all. Don't contact me. I'm not ready for that, and I may never be. But I wanted you to know that I don't hate you anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I have better things to do with my life. Be well, Marcus." E. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Then he sat down on his narrow bed and wept. Not tears of self-pity, he had shed enough of those in prison. These were tears of something else. Relief, maybe. Gratitude. The overwhelming emotion of being seen by someone you had wronged and being acknowledged as capable of change. He kept the letter in his wallet folded into a small square that he could feel against his hip whenever he sat down. A reminder. A talisman. A promise to himself that he would never again become the man who had needed to be brought down. 2 years after his release, Marcus was invited to speak at a business ethics conference in San Francisco. The irony wasn't lost on him, a convicted fraudster lecturing future executives about integrity. But the organizers had read about his work with the nonprofit. They had seen interviews where he spoke candidly about his crimes, his punishment, and his transformation. They wanted him to share his story. Marcus almost said no. Public speaking meant attention, and attention had never led anywhere good for him. But then he thought about the young people who would be in that audience, ambitious, hungry, convinced that success justified any means necessary. He had been one of them once. Maybe he could save some of them from making the same mistakes. The conference hall was packed. 300 people, mostly young professionals in expensive suits, watched as Marcus walked to the podium. He could see the skepticism in their eyes. Who was this broken-down ex-convict to tell them about ethics? He cleared his throat. 7 years ago, I was exactly where you are now. Young, ambitious, absolutely certain that I was the smartest person in every room I walked into. He paused. I built a $50 million company from nothing. I had a beautiful wife, a mansion in Pacific Heights, cars that cost more than most people make in a year. By every measure society uses to define success, I had made it. He looked out at the faces watching him. And then I lost everything. Not because of bad luck, not because of market forces, not because someone else betrayed me. I lost everything because I betrayed myself. He told them the story, all of it. The offshore accounts, the fake evidence against Elena, the humiliation of being exposed in open court, the 6 years in federal prison. He didn't embellish, didn't make excuses, didn't try to paint himself as a victim. The thing about fraud, Marcus said, is that you always think you're getting away with it. You think you're too smart to get caught. You think the rules are for other people. And every day you don't get caught, that belief gets stronger. He shook his head. But here's what they don't tell you in business school. Fraud is a trap that closes slowly. Every lie you tell creates another vulnerability. Every corner you cut makes the next one easier. And by the time you realize you're in trouble, you're so deep that there's no way out. He looked directly at a young man in the front row who reminded him painfully of his younger self. Confident posture, expensive watch, the subtle smirk of someone who thought he had life figured out. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this won't happen to you. You're smarter, more careful. You won't get caught. Marcus smiled sadly. I thought that too, right up until the moment the FBI walked through my door. When the speech was over, the audience gave him a standing ovation, not for his accomplishments, but for his honesty. A dozen people came up afterward to thank him, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. But one conversation stayed with Marcus more than any other. A woman approached him after the crowd had thinned. She was in her 40s, well-dressed, with the tired eyes of someone carrying a heavy burden. Mr. Blackwell, I'm Sarah Chen. The name hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Chen, are you? Vanessa's older sister. Sarah's voice was neutral, neither hostile nor friendly. She asked me to give you something. She held out an envelope. Vanessa wanted to apologize for how she treated you at the end. She said it's been bothering her for years. Marcus took the envelope but didn't open it. She doesn't owe me an apology. I used her just as much as she used me. We were both terrible people doing terrible things. She's different now, married, 2 kids, runs a small interior design firm in Seattle. Sarah paused. She says losing you was the wake-up call she needed. Seeing your downfall made her realize where her own path was leading. Marcus nodded slowly. Tell her I'm glad she found her way. Tell her I hope she's happy. Sarah studied him for a moment. You really have changed, haven't you? I hope so. I try to be better every day, but change isn't a destination, it's a process. You never really arrive. Sarah left, and Marcus opened the envelope. Inside was a photo of Vanessa with her husband and two small children, standing in front of a modest house with a white picket fence. She looked happy, settled. Nothing like the ambitious, hungry young woman who had abandoned him the moment his credit card stopped working. On the back of the photo, she had written, "Thank you for showing me what I didn't want to become." Marcus tucked the photo into his wallet next to Elena's letter. 2 more reminders. 2 more reasons to keep moving forward. 3 years after his release, Marcus got a phone call he never expected. He was at the nonprofit office reviewing case files when his cell phone rang. The number was blocked. "Hello, Mr. Blackwell." A woman's voice, professional and crisp. "Please hold for Mr. Ashford." Marcus's heart stopped. There was a click, and then that familiar gravelly voice came through the line. "Marcus, it's Victor." "Mr. Ashford." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "Is everything okay? Is Elena?" "Elena is fine. Better than fine, actually." Victor paused. "I'm calling because I have a proposition for you." Marcus waited. "My foundation funds programs for at-risk youth kids from difficult backgrounds who are at risk of ending up in the criminal justice system. We've been looking for someone to lead a new initiative focused on financial literacy and ethical decision-making. You want me to work for your foundation. I want you to run the program. Full autonomy, adequate funding, the chance to make a real difference." Victor's voice was matter-of-fact. "I've been watching you, Marcus. The work you've done at that nonprofit, the speaking engagements, the interviews where you've been honest about your failures. You've become exactly the kind of person who can reach these kids." Marcus was speechless. "I'm not offering you forgiveness," Victor continued. "What you did to my daughter is not something I can forgive, but I can recognize that you've changed. And I can recognize that your experience, your failures, your punishment, your redemption makes you uniquely qualified for this work." "Why?" Marcus finally managed. "Why would you help me after everything I did?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. "Because Elena asked me to." The words hung in the air. "She's been following your progress. She reads every article, watches every interview. She's proud of who you've become, Marcus. She told me that if you had been this man when she married you, everything would have been different." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. "She doesn't want to see you," Victor added quickly. "She's moved on with her life. She's engaged to that architect I mentioned. Good man treats her the way she deserves. But she wanted me to give you this chance. She said everyone deserves a chance at redemption, even the people who hurt us the most." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Tell her thank you. Tell her I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this. Tell her yourself." Victor's voice softened slightly. "Write her a letter. She won't respond, but she'll read it. I promise you that." After Victor hung up, Marcus sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the phone in his hand. Elena had been watching him. All this time, all these years she had been watching. Not because she wanted him back, not because she had forgiven him, but because some part of her still cared about the person he was becoming. That night, Marcus sat down and wrote the hardest letter of his life. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to explain or justify or minimize. He simply told her the truth about his time in prison, about the work he'd been doing, about the man he was trying to become. And at the end he wrote, "You saved my life, Elena. Not by staying with me, by leaving. You showed me that my actions had consequences. You showed me that I couldn't charm or lie or buy my way out of everything. You showed me that there was someone in this world who loved me enough to walk away. I will never be able to repay what I owe you, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to honor the gift you gave me, the gift of clarity, the gift of truth, the gift of a second chance. Thank you for believing I could change, even when I gave you every reason not to. with respect and gratitude. Marcus? He mailed the letter the next morning and never heard back. But somehow he knew she had read it, and somehow that was enough. 5 years after his release, Marcus Blackwell stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., accepting an award for his work with at-risk youth. The program he had built had helped thousands of young people avoid the criminal justice system. Former gang members had become accountants. Kids from broken homes had earned scholarships to college. A generation of potential fraudsters had learned that there were better ways to achieve success. As Marcus looked out at the audience, politicians, philanthropists, journalists, he thought about how far he had come. He thought about the arrogant young man who had raised a champagne glass in a courtroom and called his wife dead weight. He thought about the broken prisoner who had sobbed alone in his cell, realizing too late what he had destroyed. He thought about all the versions of himself he had been and all the versions he might yet become. And then he saw them. In the back of the room, standing near the exit, were 2 figures. An old man with a silver wolf head cane, and beside him, a woman with dark hair and quiet eyes, older now, but still beautiful. Still possessed of that gentle strength that he had once mistaken for weakness. Elena. She had come. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. Elena didn't smile. She didn't wave. She didn't give any sign of acknowledgement except the slightest nod, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. I see you. I see who you've become. And then she turned and walked out, her father beside her, disappearing into the night. Marcus watched her go. He didn't chase after her. He didn't call out. He didn't try to bridge the gap that would always exist between them. Some things he had learned couldn't be fixed. Some wounds were too deep to heal completely. Some relationships were meant to end not because the love had died, but because the love had changed into something else, something that could only exist at a distance. But in that brief moment of acknowledgement, Marcus found something he had been searching for his entire life. Peace. Not the peace of forgetting or the peace of being forgiven, but the peace of knowing that his transformation was real, that the man he had become was worthy of respect, maybe not from Elena, maybe not from the world, but from himself. That night alone in his hotel room, Marcus pulled out his wallet and looked at the 2 items he had carried for years. Elena's letter worn soft from countless readings. Maybe there was something worth saving in you after all. And Vanessa's photo, with its simple inscription, "Thank you for showing me what I didn't want to become." He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the arrogance and the fall, the prison cell and the parole board, the halfway house and the non-profit, the letters and the speeches, and the slow, painful work of rebuilding a life from the ashes of his own destruction. He thought about the judge who had sentenced him to 10 years for his crimes against society. And he thought about the real sentence, the one that no court could impose, the sentence of living with the knowledge of who he had been and the daily challenge of becoming someone better. Marcus put the wallet away and walked to the window. The city spread out before him, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Elena was going home to the man who loved her. Somewhere out there, young people were making choices that would shape the rest of their lives. Somewhere out there, the world was turning indifferent to his struggles and his triumphs. But Marcus Blackwell was no longer indifferent. He had learned in the hardest possible way that life wasn't about what you accumulated. It wasn't about the money you made, or the power you wielded, or the people you dominated. It was about the person you became when everything was stripped away. It was about the legacy you left in the lives you touched. It was about the courage to look at yourself honestly and the strength to change what you saw. Marcus turned away from the window and began preparing for bed. Tomorrow, there would be more work to do, more young people to reach, more chances to make a difference. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Because Marcus Blackwell had finally learned the lesson that had eluded him for 40 years. The measure of a man is not what he takes from the world, but what he gives back to it. And in the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered.